The agenda this week put productivity on the party platforms, explored what the graying of Canada means to the election campaign, and put a price tag on a prescription drug plan for Canadians. The agenda's week in review begins with disappearing data. Chris, Anne is clearly seeing a disappearing data crisis in Canada. Are you seeing that too?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think probably at the center of what I describe in my book as the war on science is a hostility to expertise generally, to the information generated by experts. Just a government that has deliberately, on a whole bunch of different levels, all throughout its activities, reduced the amount of information that it wants to gather and see to make decisions. So really, as Anne was saying, at a time when a lot of governments and certainly businesses and other organizations are thinking, let's get as much information as possible. It's an extraordinary time to be, being able to gather information. This is a government that is deliberately over its 10 years in power reduced the amount of information it considers when it makes policy, and it really, I think, it comes to a fundamental distrust and dislike of outside expertise.
Michael, let's get you to follow up on this. Are you seeing the same thing these other two are?
Yeah, absolutely I am. And I think it's particularly interesting and ironic that we have a government that is reducing access to public information, public data, at the same time as it's massively increasing its own reliance on internal data. In other words, we've never had a political party in this country that I'm aware of that has relied more on polling and information than the Conservative Party has. And in fact, it's been so successful in doing that that the other parties have adopted many of the same techniques. They've been forced to do that by competitive pressure. So on the one hand, you have a party that has the Constituent Information Management System, the SIMS database, which is this massive monster tool, really, that can be used in very, very effective ways politically.
Monster's a little tough, isn't it?
Well,
calling it a monster? I mean, it's a political tool.
But it's a very effective and powerful political tool, I guess I should say, to the point where the Liberals have adopted their own, called Liberalist, which was something that was designed for the Obama campaign in 2012. And my point is simply that clearly the government is very aware of the value of data, of really drilling into the demographics and finding out what exactly people want to see in federal policy. So does it then raise alarm bells that the same government is reducing access to public information in the way that it has? And I think it does raise alarm bells.
Tell me this, because you cover the political scene, obviously, in the nation's capital. On numerous occasions, we've invited people from the Conservative government, from the Conservative Party, to join us here in this studio and sort of explain why they are doing this, what they think's going on here, and invariably they decline our invitation to do so. Mm-hmm. Any idea why? It's an excellent question. We've all asked ourselves the same question. I've been asking myself this for many years. The best answer I can come up with is simply that it's a desire to avoid mistakes. And that's the most benevolent cast one can put on it. It's simply an obsession with managing information and managing communication so that the unguarded moment or the flub on TV that becomes, something like the Peloton fist pump that gets massive viral coverage on Twitter. They want to avoid that kind of thing at all costs. So what that has led to is an obsession with information control that in some cases, in many cases, actually has stepped on their own message. And let's try to understand when this started. Stephen Harper, as we've been reminded thousands of times during this election campaign, has been in office for almost a decade. Did this start in 2006?
I think it started slowly. We can track some of the changes. I think that there were certain pivotal moments. One was the elimination of the mandatory long-form census, which we didn't get to when I was mentioning all of the erosion at the beginning.
Well, that's 5 years ago.
That's 5 years ago. That was in 2010. It was sort of announced, but it was a longer-term plan. And then we saw, with the election of a majority government in 2011, we saw a lot of just sort of a rampage through StatsCan. We saw the loss of longitudinal studies.
Rampage? You're happy with that word?
Well, I shouldn't say. It was a systemic elimination that was, I think that there was a barrage. If you actually look at the number of things that took place, there were a lot of cuts. That's when the austerity program really kicked into place. You saw huge changes at Libraries Archives Canada. StatsCan was heavily hit to the point that we have decades of data that scientists and economists can't access when they're looking for information about the environment or for, let's say, the oil price. Trying to figure out what's going on with the oil price? Hard to do. We cannot find that data. So that I think that we saw, it doesn't begin strictly in 2006, but the government has been consistent, as we've talked about, sort of controlling a narrative that, you know, isn't marred by evidence gathered by other sources.
Let me ask Michael a kind of National Post, Terry Corcoran, Kelly McPartland kind of question here, which is, are this a bunch of bleeding heart, bleeding lefties who are all upset about this, or does this go beyond that?
Well, the bleeding heart lefties are upset about this, but they're not the only ones. And I think that's why this is an issue that has broader reach. It is, of course, you know, the kind of topic that comes up at every liberal convention going back any number of years. You'll get a policy workshop and people will raise their fists and shake their, you know, get angry about the war on science. So it has become resonant in that sense with the left. But you know, unlike some issues, this one has legs because it's real. All of these, the phenomenon that Anne talks about in her piece, I mean, it's fact. It's not. This isn't something anybody's making up. It's not a political. You know, it's not an effort to try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. These things have actually happened, and the data are gone. And I think the bigger concern about this, it hasn't happened yet, but once we start to see government get into partnerships with companies like Google and Facebook that have enormous access to private data and are acquiring it now with no public oversight at all, because these are privately held companies, then we're getting into really uncharted territory, and that I think really should raise a lot of civil libertarian concerns.
Chris, how much of this, in your view, then is based on message control, the need to control the narrative, the need to make sure that you're not derailed by some dumb eruption from some candidate somewhere on social media at some point 10 years ago?
I mean, I think that's part of of what's going on here, and is probably the most understandable part. And you know, I agree with Michael that you know, if we do get a new government next week, it will probably, you know, continue to use some of those tools of centralized message control and the rest of it. But if you look at where some of the cuts to actually gathering information, not just how it's communicated and disseminated, but actually getting information, analyzing it, using information, using the best available evidence to inform policy, that goes well beyond just message discipline. I mean, this is a prime minister and a government that's openly contemptuous of you know, broad sectors of you know, expert opinion and scientific information. You know, the prime minister likes to say, let's not go committing sociology as, you know, in just the most dismissive way possible. But really what he's saying is, oh yeah, you know, a bunch of eggheads might put a bunch of numbers together and say this is what's happening with crime, and that we should be, you know, having safe injection sites just because their data says that that's a good idea. But you and I, we know better that you know, as Canadians, this is what we stand for. These are our values. So it's really not just about you know, not wanting, you know, the most junior member of the caucus saying something dumb. It's also about you know, ignoring huge chunks of evidence that would go against your policy goals.
It had actually reached the point in Fisheries and Oceans where I was working that I was just too frustrated to do my job. And as you pointed out, I've been there 30 years, actually 32 years, and I just love the science. I didn't want to leave that behind, but the last few years have just been unconscionable. So I decided to make the move, and here I am, and I'm still doing basically the same type of work that I did in Canada. It's just that I'm doing it in a much, much more positive atmosphere.
What changed over the last few years?
It was a whole host of things, Steve. You know, we've had a long-term slide in the amount of research funding that we had available. So it wasn't that. You know, we're perfectly capable of going out and seeking other funding. It was more the non-financial roadblocks that were put in our place that seemed to be put in the place solely to impede our ability to do science or to report on it. And for someone like myself who was heading up the shark research lab in Canada, and sharks, of course, you know, they get a lot of attention from the public, from the media, and it's the type of thing that you want to be able to share with the people, the taxpayers that are paying for it. And we were stopped from doing so, and it was just it was too much. I had to leave.
One more question before I get Katie in, and you say non-financial roadblocks. What's a non-financial roadblock? Who stopped you from talking about it, and how?
Okay, well, it's actually a multi-part answer, but I guess one of them is, the prime focus of why we're here is the muzzling aspect. So we were given very explicit instructions that we were not to communicate to the media without prior approval, and very often when you asked for that approval, you didn't get it. So that was one very clear example, and I'm not talking about policy issues or things that might potentially impact the way the government is viewed. These were totally non-partisan, very often real interest stories, things like where poor beagle sharks go to give birth, something that has no policy implications for the country, but we were not allowed to talk to it about the public or to the media.
Now, clearly, Stephen Harper doesn't get on the phone and call his fellow Stephen Campana in Fisheries and Oceans and say, I don't want you attending this conference, or I don't want you talking to the media. So again, I need some more clarity on how the sort of word goes forth that interviews are not being given, conferences are not being attended, and so on.
Yeah, well, so most of the departments actually have their own department-wide communication policy that deals with how scientists can talk to the media. And a lot of those departments did actually have very explicit changes to the policies starting around 2007, where they now made it very explicit that scientists could no longer just talk directly to a journalist like it used to be, that now instead they had to actually go through the communications department and get approval beforehand. And what we've seen is this has almost resulted in, I almost call it muzzling by bureaucracy. So thankfully we've had some really great journalists who, when their interview request was denied, they filed access to information requests. And so what we've ended up seeing in some cases is literally like 500 pages of emails being returned of different levels of government and different bureaucrats discussing whether or not the scientists could do this interview.
Sheldon, if you would, we'll bring this up here. This is from PharmaCare 2020. We're calling this the dope on pharma. 500 million prescriptions filled at retail pharmacies in Canada this year at a cost of $30 billion. That's 4 times what we spent on prescriptions 20 years ago. Public drug plans cover 42% of all prescription drug costs in Canada. Private drug plans cover 36% of all prescription drugs in the country. Canadians themselves pay for 22% of all prescription drug costs out of pocket, and that works out to about $6 billion a year. That's the lay of the land right now. So, Carla, when we hear candidates promising a national pharmacare program, what are they referring to?
Well, we're encouraged that there is a discussion about pharmacare at the national level in the campaign debates. Everybody has a different opinion of what pharmacare is or what should look like, and we polled Canadians in regards to what their vision of pharmacare was, and I think the fundamental vision of pharmacare should be that no Canadian should be left behind. When you refer to the 22% of Canadians out of pocket, a lot of those Canadians have no coverage. And we know from our studies that about 1 in 10 Canadians have difficulty or have problems with affording prescription drugs.
I actually got all the numbers here from your survey. So let's just go through these briefly here. 79% of Canadians support the idea of a national pharmacare program. 31% of Canadians support replacing all existing plans with one universal plan. Nearly half of Canadians support covering only those who are not currently covered. About a quarter of Canadians support only covering those facing extreme circumstances. That's your survey done by Abacus Data. What do you infer from all those numbers?
Well, I think there's fundamentally 3 things. One, first of all, is that those Canadians who have private insurance coverage, there's an 80% satisfaction rate with their private plan. But at the same time, Canadians have a high moral responsibility for their neighbors. And we all hear stories about, the family that faces drug costs and can't afford them. And so generally Canadians really want to ensure that no Canadian is left behind, that while they may have private insurance coverage, they want to make sure that their neighbor who has no insurance coverage does have options. So
when you hear national pharmacare strategy, what are you thinking?
So I'm thinking about more than just covering everyone, although covering everyone must absolutely be one of the core principles. We need universal coverage. We don't currently have it. But beyond covering everyone, we needed a greater incentive to quality in the system and better control of costs. So when we talk about quality, if you look at the proportion of Canadians who have employer-based drug coverage, virtually all of those private plans cover every drug for everyone, no matter the cost, no matter the appropriateness. And that's how we've ended up in the situation that we're currently in, where ironically, some Canadians can't access the medicine that they need, and many Canadians are actually being over-medicated. So for example, we know that 1 in 3 seniors is currently being prescribed a medication on the Beers list, which is a list of medicines that should never be prescribed to people over the age of 65 because they're dangerous. And so at the same time that we have under-access, we have too much medicine being given to some people, and our private plans are not able to promote that quality agenda because the incentive for a private plan is to have more prescriptions file through and to make the money that way. The third aspect is cost. So we know that in Canada we currently pay 35% more than the OECD average for our prescription medications. And so the reality is actually, at the same time that we have people who can't access their medications, as a country we are being ripped off, and we are not in a situation where we're getting good value for our dollars. And so pharmacare has to include not only universal access, but also an incentive to quality and reduced costs.
Is there a recognition, do you think, among the political leaders at the moment who are out there stumping for votes, that the healthcare system in the country right now is going through one of its kind of historic transitions, and that they need to help do something about that? You're right, what you said off the top. We've heard precious little about healthcare during the campaign. Do they understand that they need to help kind of usher in this new era?
Because I think because they're not talking about it, so we really don't know how much they really understand. But I think from the grassroots, from the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, we know how important it is. And I think that's why we need the politicians and the political parties to listen to, to the people on the ground, as well as of course, the seniors themselves, the people who are receiving care, the providers, as well as, of course, the federal and provincial governments all involved in this discussion. And I think what we really need is actually that leadership of that bold vision. That bold vision should not be driven by just an agenda that would last for like next 4 years after the election, but really should lay out in the longer term how we're we are not only providing care, but we're going to promote care and promote wellness. And I think, that kind of integrated approach around the whole sectors, not just health, but all the other, providers and all the other portfolios within the ministry needs to all work together. Because right now we're not seeing that kind of national leadership around, an Alzheimer's strategies and caregiver strategies and pharmacare strategies, and all these would take a long time to implement, and I totally appreciate that, but we're not even hearing. So what's your vision? What's your key principles that would drive your agenda? And we're not hearing that.
Let me follow up with Adina, because Amy did mention a good list there of several compelling issues that we're not hearing much about that maybe we ought to be hearing more about. Let me add another one to that list. End-of-life care, physician-assisted suicide.
Yeah.
Two heavy things that I'm sure your members are talking a lot about.
Absolutely.
What do you want to hear on that?
Well, it's a quality of life, and it's the choice of the person and their doctor and their family. It's integrated into a continuum of personal care that goes from acute to ongoing to home care to long-term care, and in the end to palliative care. That's the evolution of a human being, and that's the process. And our medical strategies, policies at all the levels of government and all the players have to play into that. That is, coming around again. It's the new old.
So then my question for the former politician is, are those issues too scary and controversial for anybody stumping for votes to talk about right now?
Absolutely.
They are.
It should be no surprise to anybody that nobody's getting up on a soapbox about the issue. I suspect that, in fact, the way this will be resolved is the way the abortion issue was resolved.
The courts?
The court has ruled, and I have a very strong suspicion that no matter who forms the government, that we've heard the end of it.
I get tired about hearing this business about the boomers. I'm on the leading edge of the baby boom cohort, and I'm pretty healthy. And when we look at the data, The boomers aren't going to be, the leading edge isn't going to be turning 75 or 80, 85 when the healthcare needs really start to increase for another 15 or 20 years. So the need to panic because of what some people, I call it demo doom, I think is overstated. But I'd like to return, to a couple earlier points. The point about quality was raised, and I think it's really important in the context of end-of-life care, palliative care. But there's an old line, you get what you measure and you can't manage what you don't measure. And there is a pervasive problem in our healthcare system that we don't measure healthcare outcomes in any systematic or rigorous way. It's a complete mess from an information point of view. By the way, I spent a couple decades at StatCan trying to do this. So it's not surprising that we can't figure out, when it comes time to squeeze the healthcare budget, you get across the board cuts rather than things that cut out the procedures or things that are ineffective. Another point, I think it was Amy Go was raising about the broader determinants of health and well-being. This is fundamentally important. It's not very popular or noticed at all in the current political discussion, but I would like to use it to bring back another point which I raised at the beginning, which is I hear nothing about the intersection of expanding the Canada Pension Plan, for example, and the relationship to long-term care and home care. Given the kinds of fiscal pressures that are being faced by the provinces, it's unlikely that 100% first dollar coverage is going to happen for all of those things in the next 20 or 30 years. So it really is important to try to understand the interrelationship of retirement income adequacy and what people are going to be having to pay for out of pocket to an increasing degree over the next 10, 20, 25 years for these currently uninsured or only partially covered services.
Okay, Adina, I know you want to get in, but hold that thought because this is a great segue to actually your Action on Seniors Poverty study just out. Let's bring up the bullet points on this CARP study, shall we here? This is the empty nest egg. More than 600,000 seniors in Canada live in poverty. That's 12% of all seniors. 1 in 4 single seniors lives in poverty, and most of them are women. There are 12 million working Canadians, 2/3 of all workers who do not have workplace pension plans. Projections show that approximately half of Canadians will encounter a 25% decline in their standard of living once they retire, and 44% of caregivers are over the age of 45 years old. These are all from CARP's Action on Seniors Poverty study. Let's unpack this a bit, shall we, Adina? Why do you think there's so many Canadians struggling to make ends meet in their later years?
Oh, well, like we just learned, 66% don't have industrial pensions. If you take a look at OAS and CPP, maybe an average of $1,000 a month doesn't even get your rent in downtown Toronto, let alone in other cities across the province. People are being pushed out of the labor force, the workforce, at 65, when in fact some people are going to have to work much, much longer for at least another 10, 15, 20 years in order to keep a roof over their head and contribute to the social safety net that we have constructed at all levels of government so as not to impact our children and grandchildren. And this is where, I want to just sort of head back to what Michael was saying. It's not the panic. It's now's the time to take a look at the vision and the planning and the working towards the model that we want to be intact and in place when that happens.
And when that happens is what? Are we talking 10 years down the road when we need it to be in place?
15
okay.
years. I mean, at older ages, seniors start using the healthcare system more. Everything's replaceable. We have new medical technologies that are keeping people alive much longer and in healthy and active lives. But that also has its own stresses on the system.
Sure. The problem in Canada is that we have a discourse in the policy circles and in the business organization leaders and the political class that is really mired in 30, 40 years ago, 20th century traditional manufacturing economy. So they haven't updated their understanding of how an ideas economy works. So there's gaps and incompleteness in the approach, and until we acknowledge and address those gaps, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over again and not get returns for our tremendous level of investment.
Have you been able to come to any conclusions yet based on what you know about the TPP as to whether or not Canada's well protected in that?
Well, I think that the issue with TPP is it was done without consultation with Canadian innovators, so we don't know. And if you read the media carefully, there was a good story in the New Yorker last week about how Silicon Valley got everything they wanted in TPP. So good on them. And we have no dialogue. I've talked to our main innovators in this country. None of them were consulted on TPP. None of them has any idea on it. So is it good? If it's good for Canada's prosperity, well, then we're lucky. But it's kind of like playing darts blindfolded. If we're lucky, it's just because we're lucky, not because we took a systemic and deliberate approach to Canada's prosperity.
I think our negotiators consulted auto. I think they consulted agriculture, but not innovators. Why aren't innovators at that same table?
Well, I partly blame our innovators because they have to step up their role in saying what they want, and that the passivity has not served them well. If the biggest, most successful tech companies in the world are actively lobbying in every capital of the world, they were 108 times, and the top 4 were 108 times in Ottawa in the last 2 years. Our top 2 or 3 hot companies are 0. So of course Ottawa is going to take their message. So you have to engage if you want to get the rules the way you want it. And I think a passive approach isn't going to work for anybody in this. It's non-engagement on the policy creators, and it's passiveness on the entrepreneur side. It can be fixed, but if we keep taking the same approach, it's not going to work.
Is part of the problem here, people can get their heads around the notion of the TPP adversely affecting, let's say, the family farm or the auto manufacturing plant that may be a couple of miles down the road, but the notion of dealing with intellectual property is a bit of a bridge too far. Is that part of the problem here?
That's exactly the main problem. You've hit the main problem right on the head, is that the ideas economy is fundamentally different than a traditional manufacturing economy, and people have to understand that. So I'm going to try a little bit of a minute to explain that here. Goods, you only have a market for ideas if the government puts a bunch of rules around it. Because, for instance, intellectual property protection is a bunch of government rules. And it's by a bunch of laws and a bunch of agencies, and it's managed by a bunch of courts. Copyright is a bunch of rules. And so they're changed and modified dozens of times every day. So it only happens, the market, is if you manage it by the government. And so this idea that an intangible ideas market is similar to a traditional market, it's the complete opposite. And in fact, when you put in a new rule, it's a constraint. So the words free trade and open trade and intellectual property rules are contradictory. So you're using the exact wrong words if you use a traditional market to describe an ideas market. And you're right, it is something that many people aren't familiar with because we don't have a deep well of innovation companies putting it in the discourse, lobbying for it. And so it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. And that's why I'm trying to talk about it here, is saying you need to understand how it works. You need to understand that it's created by rules. And it's totally different than a farm. And if you don't understand that, then you just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And that's why I keep saying we need to update our understanding, because if you get this one thing I'm saying here, then you're on your way.
I want to share some numbers. These are your numbers, Glenn, so you will be well aware of them. If Canada's labor productivity had matched that of the United States between the years 1988 and 2008, how would our lives be different? Well, here's how. Real GDP per capita in the country would have been $8,500 higher. Personal disposable income would have been $7,500 higher. Corporate profits would have been 40% higher. Federal government revenues would have been up by a third almost. Conference board numbers. Glenn, starting with you. June past, you wrote a piece in which you predicted Canada's lagging productivity would not become an issue during the federal election campaign. Campaign's almost over. Were you right?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I do economic forecasting for a living, Steve, And frankly, that was a fairly easy call because it's a really hard concept to explain to voters, even in the best of times, and an election is probably not the best of times, to try and sell a vague concept like productivity.
It doesn't appear as if any of the three main parties are taking much of an interest in this issue of productivity, despite the numbers we just showed. And I wonder if you have any theories as to why that is.
Yeah, sure. There's two obvious reasons. The first one is, and I'd go even further than what Glenn said about it being difficult to explain. The general public has absolutely the wrong idea what productivity is. Many focus groups and surveys have been done, and the majority view of productivity means that work harder for less pay. So in other words, exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to mean. So I guess you could debate whether you should take that on and try to correct the public opinion, but governments tend to just abandon it. And secondly, it's not all that obvious what levers to pull to improve it. And a lot of the things that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that people, including all three of us, said government should do to increase productivity have been done in some form, and the productivity growth rate didn't go up. So the moment you start getting into a debate in an election period or otherwise, you're going to do a long conversation, which is very difficult to convey to people. So they tend to steer away from it. I can actually tell you there's a global edit function in government documents. The word has not appeared in any Canadian federal government document for many years. I don't know if just everybody has the discipline to never write it. I suspect they just have a software function that searches for it and takes it out.
Huh. Andrew Sharp, let's just follow up on what Don said there. When people come to you and say, oh, I know what productivity is, it means you want me to work more and get paid less, what do you say to them?
Well, I'm saying that's a misleading concept of productivity. Also, of course, people think there's job loss. If we work harder, actually, there'll be no jobs left in that sector, and there actually is some truth on that at a particular sector level. But overall, productivity doesn't, at the total economy level, does not lead to job loss. In fact, it guarantees jobs through increased cost competitiveness. But productivity is a tricky concept, even for economists. There's different concepts of productivity in the business community and in the economics community. The economists, when they talk about productivity, they're talking about over time growth in real output per worker. Business people, when they're talking about productivity, they're talking about current dollar value added or output per worker. And they're not the same concept at all. So there's a disconnect between the debates in the business community and among economists on the productivity issue.
The numbers that we mentioned off the top there are, I guess they go back to 2000 and, what did I say there, 8.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit down the road from then. Have things changed at all since then?
Well, arguably they've actually gotten worse. Our productivity growth rates as a country over the last 4 or 5 years have been pathetic. The American rates are also not very good, but they're a little bit better than ours. I have a slide that I show where over the last, say, 15 years, U.S. productivity growth rates are a percentage point faster than in Canada. So if anything, and frankly, Andrew did some of the analysis for us going back a decade or so, things have actually gotten a bit worse in the last 4 or 5 years. If we went back, we would have even higher numbers than you were quoting.
The attitude has been, in the OECD countries and Canada the last 30 years, build a competitive level playing field and productivity will come. Well, we kind of did build a competitive level playing field and productivity didn't come. So do you continue down that path? I think that's kind of naive, or do you go in a different direction? Let's take an example. You write a free trade agreement, you sit down and say life is great, now companies are going to take advantage of that. Well, they're not. So maybe there's something missing. Why is only 4% of the revenue in small and medium-sized companies in Canada come from exporting to emerging economies? Even where we do have a trade agreement, maybe they don't know how to interact with that. Maybe they can't figure out the really complicated rules for sources of origin. Maybe there actually needs to be a more activist, interventionist government role. I know that scares people, that thing, governments can't pick winners, but losers can sure pick their government. Yeah, that tends to be the record. But when you've got a problem, you've had a problem for a long time, going back to the 1970s, you got to start thinking different things and maybe trying some different things. And maybe there's a completely different type of approach that's needed on public policy.
And that is our Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety if you want. They're on our website at tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Agenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.